Good afternoon and welcome to the April 2026 edition of the Divorce Support Club, organised by Walker Family Law. I am Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I'm here to provide coaching input that otherwise it's very tricky for law firms to provide. I'm joined today by Fiona from Walker Family Law and also by Heather Rutherford. I'll ask you both to introduce yourselves if that's all right. So, Fiona, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Claire. Hi, I'm Fiona Griffin from Walker Family Law. Been a family solicitor for over 25 years, working with people going through any form of separation, whether that's a divorce or the breakdown of a cohabitation. I particularly work in the non-court dispute resolution arena, offering clients collaborative law services and also resolution together, which is one lawyer working with a couple.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And Heather, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I am a parenting specialist educator and a co-parenting with a focus on co-parenting. So I support parents as they are transitioning through separation and divorce with a focus on the children. So we focus very much on a child's emotional journey and how what parents can do practically to help that be as sort of painless as possible, really focusing on what children need with tools and strategies to help their families thrive.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, as you can tell, today we are focusing on some of the themes that come up again and again in our work with clients going through divorce. And one of the biggest things that people talk to me about in my sessions is the fear that their divorce will have a detrimental effect on their children, that their children will perhaps be distressed, that their lives will be disrupted, and that they'll lose their home, their stability, their safety, or that their relationship with their children will be damaged. So, we're going to cover a few aspects of that today. Just so that you're aware, we also have various other podcast webinars on the Walk Family Law website, which cover other aspects of this, such as telling your children that you are getting divorced, and also supporting your children through divorce, which will give other information to support what we're talking about today. So please do go back and watch or listen to those as well. So we wanted to start today with something that comes up often as a possible solution, a home solution to some of these issues, and that's nesting. And Fiona, when we were talking in preparation for this, you were saying that this comes up a lot and increasingly in your practice. Can you tell us a little bit about nesting and what it actually is?
Yeah, so it does come up an awful lot, and I think increasingly in recent times, given the cost of living crisis and the cost and availability of rental accommodation as well is a factor. So what nesting looks like in practice can differ from family to family, but effectively, in all cases, what it means is that the children typically will stay in the home and the parents will move either out of the home entirely, swapping backwards and forwards with each other, or they will occupy different spaces in the home depending on, the accommodation that's available. So they may have, some circumstances they might have an annex or just a separate bedroom, or maybe accommodation very close to the house. And then the children stay in the main house and the parents alternate. It could include parents who actually move a little bit away, so they might go and stay with friends or family when they're not in the house, and then they will move back into the house where the children are.
Yeah, it sounds as though it can be quite complicated, and I just wonder. One of the questions that we were talking about before, Heather, was we understand what this looks like in practice, but how does it actually feel from a child's perspective? Does it create the stability that parents perhaps are wanting it to, or is it just a bit confusing?
I think it's down, it can be either of those things really, because it's really down to how that it's managed. And as as Fiona mentioned, I've seen it as well in different places where it's early on in the separation, and so they're not ready to move. So parents are actually in the same home, or one moves out just to the sort of granny flat. But I think the pros of it are that there is stability for the children in the sense that they're in their same home. They don't have to move between two homes. They're in their space. So that clearly can help. And I think the another pro might be that also you get a bit of breathing space for the parents and for everyone to kind of get used to the idea. But there are certainly some kind of things to think about as well, which is that unless the parents have a really strong sort of structure and way to communicate and set things up, it can be really confusing for children. First of all, there's the idea of the whole conflict. So if parents are having trouble communicating, the children are still in the midst of that. If parents
Mm,
are often coming and going, so that can be difficult. It also can delay the transition if parents decide just to keep the arrangement kind of going. It kind of delay the stability that we're seeking for families to get to. So I think there's a lot to think about. So as far as like ways to make it work, it would be 100% to have a very detailed arrangement with specifics of schedules and what's going to happen and who's going where when very clearly to try and agree on communication between the parents and also to communicate clearly to the children. So there is a lot to think about. And I also take Fiona's point 100%, which is it's difficult now, particularly financially. So
mm.
we are seeing it.
Yeah.
I-
I guess if
yeah.
you are, sorry, Fiona, go on.
Sorry, I was just wondering there, Heather, would you say that sort of a prolonged nesting, could it almost delay recovery? By that I mean, at some point this limbo is going to need to end. So are people sort of putting off the inevitable, and by that putting off the ability for the children to adjust to a new normal?
I think 100%. I think most people that I speak to and most professionals tend to agree that nesting is a temporary sort of thing that we should do in order a solution that ultimately really, as you said, children need predictability, reliability, stability of the life that is going to what it's going to look like down the road. So it can be a bit of sort of kicking that can down the road.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sure that the motivation of parents who are looking at nesting for perhaps a longer term, as a longer term solution, their motivation is to make this easier for their children. But actually, sometimes it may make it a lot harder, or it kind of puts it off, and it maybe makes it a bit more confusing for them. Um, and going back to a point you made earlier as well, it would need to have really strong boundaries in place, wouldn't it, of who was where, when, what was what spaces were okay for everybody to use, what spaces perhaps are safe spaces for one of you or the other of you, and
Yeah.
all of those kinds of things too.
And even if you think about it, boundaries about who can come in, who can come into the
Mm,
house. Is there a new partner? There's so many different things that one really needs to talk about. And I
mm,
think that's really worth bearing in mind. And also just ultimately, as we always try and do, looking at through the children's eyes. Is it
mm.
confusing? Yeah, how does it feel?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Fiona, I just wanted to
Mm.
check as well before we move on from this part. Are there any legal implications of nesting at all that people need to be perhaps aware of?
So, probably no more than we've already said about it creating that sort of limbo. Certainly one of the questions that I'm often asked and people do worry about is whether if they move out of a property, are they going to somehow lose some of their legal rights and entitlements to that property? And even in cohabitation cases, that's not usually the case. The occupation of a property doesn't really have anything to do with a person's rights to the finances involved with the property. So no, not from that point of view. I think that sometimes legal aspects do come in if there is then sort of a dispute about the property and who's going to occupy it or certain parts of it, then you might be looking at something, in the worst case scenario, something like an occupation order to deal with the occupation of the property. But in general terms, as a temporary solution, no, there's no financial implications to that longer term.
Thank you. That's really clear. Thank you very much. So it seems then that even if the practical kind of side of nesting works, its
Mm.
success really depends on the relationship and the ability of the parents to communicate with each other. So what we want to talk about next is when parents are in conflict, because nesting requires really good co-parenting, and if there's ongoing conflict, it can make things even more difficult and far more damaging, not just to you as the adults in the situation, but to the children. So we wanted to talk a little bit about conflict and how that might feel to children. So Heather, I know that in your work you use the concept of secure attachment in your work with parents. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what that means, what it looks like in practice, and how ongoing conflict between parents impacts the children in these scenarios. I realise that's a big question.
That's that's okay. Absolutely. So my real focus is to help parents think about what children need. And we start with like, what do all children need? Not just children whose parents are divorcing and separating. And children, in order to thrive, in order to have the best prospects for success in life, need to feel securely attached to at least one caregiver in their lives. So what does that mean? Well, it means those caregivers really meet children's needs to feel safe, to feel understood and seen, to feel soothed in distress. And all these things come together to be that reliable, predictable presence in that life. And so part of it, if we go back to the safety part, is that for children, they need a caregiver who will provide them that safety. So, as you can imagine, if you have parents that are in conflict, and also it's worth mentioning that we're talking about ongoing destructive conflict, because on the other side, that constructive conflict can actually be healthy, resolved conflict, right? So, if children are exposed to this ongoing conflict, it's really difficult for them to feel safe. So they're looking to these caregivers to provide that safety and security. And actually, their world feels unstable and unsafe. So, in the simplest terms, that's really why conflicts can be so damaging. And the second thing to say is the experience of separation, divorce, as we all know, in itself is really not the issue as far as risk factors for children. It's really two things, and we know this from evidence. One of them is the exposure to ongoing, unresolved conflict. And the second one really is when it's safe to do so, to have the depth of the relationship that they can have with both of their parents. So the reason that I focus on this so much is that if we really understand why conflicts can be damaging to children, and not just today, but down the road as well. We as parents who are separating, I'm a divorced parent. I need to take the responsibility as much as I can to try and reduce this conflict, address it, improve communication with my co-parent for my children's sake.
Hmm. I noticed you mentioned there the importance of having one safe caregiver. And I imagine there are people watching who are thinking, okay, well, I can provide that, but my ex-partner clearly can't, or doesn't, or behaves in a way that doesn't provide that. And I think it's really important that we emphasize here that it's one caregiver is enough. Are you able to say a little bit more about that?
Well, we do the evidence does say I use the work to reference it of Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. They've done a lot of really good parenting research, and their model, which is called they have a lovely book called The Power of Showing Up, which we can reference. And really, they like others in attachment research are able to articulate that if you have one reliable presence, and if you think about reliability is such a good word because it's the trust. It's the no matter where you are on that stormy sea, I have a safe harbor with somebody who will reliably show up for me, who understands me, who sees me. And that is what children need in life. And it's not, again, just children of divorce and separation. Their work, for example, is for all parents, but I use it in my work because I believe that if all children need that, then children whose parents are separating need it kind of on steroids.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I guess the next question really going on from there is what kind of support do parents need to be able to manage themselves well in these scenarios? You know, those moments come where you feel triggered, you feel angry, things that can help you perhaps to steady yourself. I talk a lot with my clients about the value of taking the pause, taking the breath, that's kind of space between the stimulus and your response as
Mm.
being really, really important. I imagine you talk about very similar things in your work. So what would be your top tips for that kind of self-regulation, keeping yourself steady through that storm so that you can be that steady caregiver for your children?
I think a few things. 100%, Clara. We've talked about this, you and the pause is probably my number one top parenting tip for everyone, right? So, and actually the pause really works because if you pause and breathe deeply, there's big, deep, it actually sends a signal to your brain, which is, flipping its lid that you are safe and then it helps to you to re-regulate. And that is also the modeling that we want to be doing for our children. So my kind of top tips would be the 100% the pause. Also to think about what am I modeling for my children? So we talked about this. I'm very future focused, which I find really empowering. I do a lot of work around values for me, for everyone else. What are the values that I want my children to take on? And I want to be calm, right? I want to be predictable, consistent. So how am I going to do that? Well, I need in the moment to pause and think about what comes out of my mouth before I actually say it. I really do think what's the right thing to say in this situation. So, and then the other thing, as you said, another big one we work on is what is in my circle of control. So much of the triggering in a co-parent relationship is can be the behavior of your co-parent and I think you just have to just remember that what's in my control. I want to stay in my lane. And just going back to like I'm the one who has a huge ability to influence my children, the relationship. And so other things would be just also go and get some help. So really, really, the whole idea of putting your oxygen mask on before you help the person next to you is such a great visual, isn't it? So in order for if I'm having trouble doing that, there is 100% nothing wrong with going to get some professional help. It's amazing. Also, do you have family or friends, someone who will really be there, not just tell you what they think you want to hear? I think that would be huge, your circle around
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. The issue around what you can control, I think, is fundamental, isn't it? Because it shifts where your focus goes and where your energy goes. So if all your energy is going on wishing your ex-partner would behave differently and trying to tell them why they should be behaving differently and all the things that they might be doing that you don't agree with, you are taking your focus away from actually what you do have control over, which is modeling the kind of parent you want to be, and modeling communication that you that is respectful, that is dignified, even if the other person doesn't respond in kind. And we're going to talk a little bit more about staying in your lane in some specific scenarios a little bit later on. But what came up when we were talking in preparation, and what I often see, um, and this happens, I think, as a result of nesting, but also in co-parenting relationships where children moving between houses, is when parents become really focused on time and their time. This is my time, that's your time, and they lose sight potentially of the importance of the relationship with the children. So they become really hyper focused on time rather than relationship. And I've spoken to quite a few adult children now of whose parents divorced when they were young, and there's a pattern that grows from this, where even adult children are worrying about spending the right amount of time with each parent. You know, they get very stressed about Christmas, they get very stressed about birthdays and things. And I just wondered whether you have any thoughts around that and how parents can perhaps shift thinking about their role and their relationship rather than thinking about time and the clock.
I think it's a very good question, and I think there it goes back to the idea of the future, because
Mm,
a really great way to think about it is this is what I try and do is what is a relationship I would like my children to have with both of us, and
mm,
it's a generous thought, isn't it? And it's a put my ego aside thought, and it's really is about my children. So, do I want my children to feel that they have to or kind of guilty about spending time? Not so much. And then, as far as the time thing and the relationship, also, do I want my children to be able to do the things that they want to do, which also might impinge on my time? So, I think there's a way of really channeling that relationship angle of things. And it will mean that we know that you are going to have to step back. You're going to have to compromise. And it really is because you're thinking about what's in your children's best interest. And
mm.
hopefully that relationship down the road will be something that is positive and more secure and more and fuller.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's about taking a long-term view, isn't it? Zooming out,
Yeah.
taking a long-term view in 10 years' time, what's going to be more important? Is it going to be the time down to the number of minutes? And I've seen people, talking about this in numbers of minutes, or is it about relationship? Um, and I think as well, something that I often ask my clients and when we're talking about this kind of thing is, what do you see your role as? I remember asking a client about this, um, and we were talking about, what is your role as a parent? And she was saying that she sees her role as a parent to be to nurture her children, provide for them, to give unconditional love, but also to prepare them to be really decent people in the world who can survive on their own. These are her words. I looked them up earlier. That whether they can live full and rewarding lives, for them to be comfortable in their own skin, and with tools to go through life handling what might be thrown at them. And it was really interesting when we were talking about that, those kind of value-driven thoughts about the role that you have as a
Yeah.
parent can really shift how you feel about time
Yeah.
sometimes, I think.
And I think, oh, sorry, Fiona. I was going to
No,
say
that's right.
also, it's just about this idea as well, two things of parental kind of presence. It's a
Mm.
bit of a quality versus quantity thought as
Yes.
well, isn't it? So I am basically, I want to think about, I want to make the most of the time that I have with my child. Because, you could spend hours together, like, they're in a different room, whatever, that where actually you're not really present. Not that you need to be with your kids every moment, but we really need to think, just as you said, about all the values and also what is the quality? What is the quality of that time that I have with them?
I remember working with a dad once as well, and he was really worried about the time with his children. And we sat down and created an A3 sheet of paper with lots of ideas of things he could do with them, things he could talk about with them. And he took it home to them as well, and they all had input into it. And it really, really helped their relationship to grow over the time that we were working together. And I don't know, Fiona, do you have any thoughts around time? Because you must meet this
Yeah.
often when you're talking about parenting plans and all of
Mm,
that kind of thing.
In this, absolutely. I think this is one of the things that the legal system and the court system in particular really struggles with, because court orders in this context are a really blunt instrument, because all a court can do with a child arrangements order is set out the time that one parent is required to allow the children to be with the other parent. And so I think a lot of the focus is drawn away from that quality. And I was something, Heather, that you said about the boundaries that you need for nesting. I think it's important. I just wanted to come back on that to say that those boundaries are not to be imposed on the children. I think particularly if you are sharing accommodation within the same home or within the same property, even if you're in an annex or whatever, I have unfortunately seen situations where the parents become so hyper-focused on time that one parent will be requiring the children to be in a certain part of the house
Mm.
with them at a certain and specific time, and then not allowing them to go back to what's seen as the other parent's part of the house in what is their time. And I think we can all sit back, when we're in this forum, and understand that that's an incredibly damaging way of behaving. But I think, unless people do what you are both suggesting, which is pause and take time and really focus on this from a child's point of view, you can then see that that is not a child-focused way to behave. But yet the court and the legal system focuses almost entirely on just the brutal, well,
Yeah.
it's a Wednesday at 4 o'clock and therefore you're going to be here. And that does not take into account any qualitative elements of a parenting relationship or the child's needs in any particular way. So
Mm.
I think, what we say as professionals is very much the last place you want to end up in trying to resolve these arrangements is before a court, because you are literally going to get a timetable and it's not going to take any of those other things into account.
I
Yeah.
suppose the bluntness of it as an instrument means as well that on an ongoing basis, you have to keep referring back to a court order when you want to, I don't know, say swap a weekend or take the children on holiday, or all of those things then become much more full of conflict as well.
Yeah, and I think that it it also, where I also see parents coming to legal advice is where they want to try and impose some sort of control on how the other parent parents. And again, back to your point, Heather, about
Mm.
staying in your lane unless there's an absolute risk being posed by the parent's behavior, which of course, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about differences in parenting approach. Again, the law isn't going to solve that. Parents will parent differently, and if your co-parent parents differently from you, then the law isn't going to resolve that for you. And so, working with specialists like yourself and Claire, I think that's where people need to be looking for that sort of help and guidance.
Yeah, I think often people make an assumption that the law is going to give them a definitive answer, which will solve all the problems, and often it doesn't. So thinking about staying in your own lane, we were thinking about some, things that come up in conversations with us, times when perhaps you're riled or your ex-partner does something, perhaps they don't turn up or they criticize you. What does staying in your own lane actually look like day to day? So we talked about some examples. So
Yeah.
one that Heather was talking about was, your child comes home and says, Mum, Dad said you didn't pack the right things for my time away with him. Or the child comes home and says, "Well, Dad says that you always do that," or Mum says that you never do that and you're always really unreliable. Um, or your ex doesn't pick the children up on time or doesn't come at all. How how should parents be handling those kinds of things? And how do you stay in your own lane when your ex-partner is either deliberately or not undermining or bad mouthing you? Because I mean, that's really difficult, isn't it, to handle?
It is very difficult to handle. Yeah. I really going back to thinking about where we started around the kind of values and the relationship and your own kind of moral code. So Claire, you mentioned that your lovely client saying what kind of person they would love
Mm.
their child to become or the kind of parent they want to be. I think if we start with that always, then we know, therefore, that what the parent I want to be, and therefore that's my own code of conduct, right? So it's really hard, and that's where this pause comes in again and again. Is I just need to take a huge deep breath and think, what is the best way for me to respond to this rather than reacting? So on the first side, as far as your child, we know that children see themselves as half half one parent, half the other. So that's the other reason why bad mouthing the other parent is really not a healthy thing to do. It doesn't actually help children feel safe because so we know it's not the right thing, and it's disappointing when you hear it from the co-parent. So really taking the deep breath, thinking all that, and that means I'm not going to join this party, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to, right? This is a party that I'm been invited to, but I'm not going to join it. I'm not going to go. I'm going to stay in my lane. So then we want to take a deep breath and think about what the child might be feeling and how we can respond. So you might say, "Ooh, either, okay, Dad says you didn't pack all the right stuff. Okay, well, thanks so much for letting me know." Can be frustrating when you feel you don't have everything you need with you when you need it. And it might be, depending upon what it is, don't worry, I'll talk to dad about that if it's
Mm.
possible. So you just don't get involved and join the party. And also you want to as well acknowledge and validate your child's feelings. So, that must be hard for you not to have the right stuff. Gosh, to go to swimming without your cap or something must have been tricky for you. So it's validating how they feel without trying to get drawn in. And also, hardest, whatever the right expression is about throwing your co-parent under the bus, uh, I'm not going to do that much as I might think it's a good
Mm.
idea.
Yeah, something else that I was thinking about in this context as well is around empowering your children
Yeah.
to, there are sometimes things that they might be, especially as they get older, there are things that they might actually be able to do to improve the situation. To perhaps, I remember saying to my own children, I mean, I've been divorced since my children were 1 and 3, and they're now 22 and nearly 20, so a long time. I remember saying to them things like, well, look, if I get involved with this, that's probably not going to help very much. So how do you think you could speak to dad in our case? How could you speak to dad about that? That might be helpful and help them to think of ways in which they could bring up some of the things for themselves as they get older.
That's a really good idea. And another, just along that line too, this is a particular situation. The other way we do it, age appropriate. We always try and set up for success. So, if your child is living in a home with both their parents, we're still going to try and empower that child to take responsibility as they grow for lots of their own things. So in this case, if it was a recurrent theme, you might say, I've been thinking. How about if we put a list together that we can write it up, we'll laminate it, we'll stick it in your bag, and you can just check off to make sure that you've got what you need in your bag. And then if they, do it once, you acknowledge the fact, hey, listen, you're showing real independence and making sure you have everything you need. That must feel good. So as much as we can, we try and, set up, anticipate what might go wrong and get there first kind of thing to make it
Yeah,
also. So you're just to your point, you're empowering and giving your child agency in this as well, which is a really, really good thing.
yeah, absolutely. I think, sometimes it can be quite tempting to see this as, especially if there's lots of conflict between you and your ex, sometimes it can be quite tempting to use all these examples as a kind of self-validation of I'm right about you all along. But actually, if you start to look at it from a totally different angle and think about empowering your children, whether that's through helping them understand their own feelings, recognizing their feelings, um, understanding perhaps that there are different rules in different houses as well. I remember that one coming up quite often.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to my children, well, dad might have a different rule about whatever it is, bedtime, I don't know, to me. And that's okay because your friend Joe, who lives down the road, he also has their house also has a different rule about bedtime. And so that's okay. You can manage with different rules in different places and, all of these things. So rather than, it's about motivation, isn't it? So my motivation was always to try and make things better for the children, easier for the children, more empowering for the children, and to give them agency in the process. It sounds that your approach is very similar.
No, 100%. And I always say to parents, and myself, what can I do now, or what can we do so that this is more likely, yeah, to go well? And
Yes.
there are so many different scenarios, aren't there? I mean,
Mm.
whether it's also emotionally well. So how can you help prepare your child emotionally for what might be happening? So or and practically, and they can all be very positive kind of, developmental things that your children
Mm.
are learning rather than, as you said, Claire, thinking of them always as being a negative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was interesting when my eldest was about 15, I asked him what he felt he had learned from having parents living in different houses. And he said that he felt he was adaptable. He felt that he was more independent than some of his friends, and that he felt that he had learned how to organize himself. So, it is possible that actually this turns out to be a good thing.
Um,
I think.
on that note, I was just talking to a client yesterday about that actually, and we don't wish separation or divorce on anyone in any family, but I think also we, in my family, I have three children, and we have had so many deep and meaningful conversations about, relationships, about so many different things that actually I feel that I, from that point of view, have been able to get really close with all three of my children, all of whom are very different. And I think also they have learned so much about relationships because they also have siblings and they can see that their relationship between them with their siblings, they've got this kind of thing that they are experiencing together. So I think they've also become quite close. And also they can see they have to manage so many different parts of it that I think, from a relationship point of view, they've learned so much that will, hold them in good stead.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. When we were talking about this webinar as well, we were talking a little bit about what happens when children, especially older ones, perhaps get drawn into process that their parents are going through the divorce process. Either they become messengers or confidants. And I think Fiona, you were talking about children actually being shown solicitors' letters or having
Mm.
being shown
Yeah.
access or shown court papers and so on. I mean, what do parents need to understand about the impact of that on children? I mean, it must be horrific for a child to be involved to that degree. Even if they're an adult, they're still our child, fundamentally,
Yeah.
aren't they?
I think there's I could give lots of examples of that where, parents are trying to almost gain a one-upmanship and want the children to understand the separation only from their point of view rather than from the children's point of view. So yes, I'd be very interested, Heather, to see this from the children's point of view.
Um, I think I was just remembering, completely right. I think the question is well, two things. Either if they see things that I had a client whose daughter, who was a kind of a young teenager, used to kind of try and read all the files, do everything, get all this kind of information. So there's things they come across, and then there's also parents who feel because they think their children are older that it's a good time to share and involve them in the process. So on the first one, I think again, it's if you come across this, it's having a conversation and say, I can completely understand your desire, your want to know what's going on. You're a curious one. You always love to find out what's going on. I totally get that. And you can ask me any questions. This is an adult process between your mom or your dad and I, and there are certain things that there aren't necessary or appropriate at your age for you to be involved in and just being kind of honest about it. And the second one, which is this kind of need for us to share, I think the question we want to ask is, does my child need to know this? There's the well, did you know that you might not know that one of the reasons why we've decided to do this kind of thing to an older child? How is that helping the child's do they need to know? Is that going to help their relationship with their co-parent? It's just really digging deep into the why I'm feeling the need to share. And also generally, as you can hear me saying, it's not necessary. Right? As you
Yeah.
said, Fiona, when we were talking before, you had lots of examples of things that were just clearly unnecessary slash inappropriate, right? For children,
Mm.
just children deserve to be respected as children with a relationship with both parents when it's safe to do so, and also just to be children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to get on with
I,
life without being kind of pulled into the process.
yeah. I think as well, if when we're talking about younger children too, they don't even need to know that the paperwork part of this
Yeah.
is even happening.
Yeah.
You know, I speak to clients quite often who talk about pressing the nuclear button, starting the divorce process off as kind of a nuclear button, but actually, and that the children will know that they've done that, but they don't necessarily even need to. Especially if you're living in separate houses and the kind of how you're organizing your lives has already shifted. They don't even really need to know about the process that's going on kind of in the background, I don't think.
Mm.
Um, we also talked a little bit about um, perhaps when children sometimes play parents off against each other. I know mine have certainly tried to do that on occasion in the past. They can push boundaries, can't they? They can try and play one parent off against the other. Um, how can we spot that, first of all, and how can we then respond to it without things escalating between us and our co-parent, perhaps?
I think probably the best word is sort of curiosity. So it's
Mm,
how things land, isn't it? It's kind of how they sound. And sometimes with kids also, you can really tell by the way they're speaking, and if they look slightly uncomfortable, that they're actually delivering something that they either are not 100% convinced in or they're looking to wind you up. I know when we were chatting, we were talking about the fact that, you know, at certain stages, developmental stages, particularly kind of sometimes with teenagers, if someone, they can actually try and wind us up, right? Even if we're all living under the same roof. So we can be quite aware and just curious about it, and it does generally sound a bit off sometimes,
mm.
doesn't it?
A little bit shifty.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I think it's a little shifty, and I love that whole thing. You can just body language, eye
Mm,
contact, lack of eye contact. Often you
yeah.
can tell.
Yeah. So my children have sometimes tried this because there's something that they want, for example, or they want to go somewhere or something, and they think that one of us will let them and the other one might not. And so they'll say to me, "Well, Dad said that this was okay, whatever." I mean, we get on okay, so I can say to my children, "Okay, that's fine. I'll go and give Dad a call and just check that that's it." And sometimes he says, "Yeah, that I did say that," and other times he says, "Mm-mm, no."
Yeah.
So, if you can co-parent together and be able to telephone each other in these kinds of circumstances, that's going to really help too.
I think
Um,
100%. And if you can't do that, that's trickier, isn't it? And then you have to again pause and take a deep breath and think about what you want to say. And it
yeah,
may be something that you end up saying, "Wow, okay, um, mm, I'm not really sure how I feel about that," or "Yeah, I'm not very comfortable with that. That doesn't really fit what feels
yeah,
right to me." Just
yeah. And you might be back into the conversation about different approaches in different houses, mightn't you,
yeah,
at that
yeah,
point? So,
100%. And the key is
yeah,
just to, again, take a deep breath and try as much as you can to remain, calm, like,
mm,
you know, good
yeah.
try. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Do
I'm
you think
very,
it's so,
oh,
sorry, do you think it's okay, Heather, for children to understand that their parents may have issues that they don't agree on? And as long as you present that in the right way, is there a best way to sort of handle that with children?
Well, let's think what 100%. I think one of the biggest things for all parents these days, which I always have a lot to say about, we won't go on that here, is just screen time and screen, all right?
yeah,
And so that's a big one, and it's difficult. Ideally, as you said, Claire, it's great that we've agreed no screens in the bedroom. We don't have screens at the table, all that sort of thing. But let's just use a little example. Like I have a no screens, always had at the table rule. I don't have, no one unless no, we just don't. Whereas my co-parent doesn't have a problem with that necessarily. So, like, guys, is my house, my rule, and you don't actually have to go justifying it. It's 100% okay to have different, rules in each house, and the key is to be consistent yourself, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Follow your own values
And you
on
might
something.
throw in a little emotion coaching and being like, "I know it's tough. I know you'd rather have all the screens lined up all over the table." Yeah. Huh.
Yeah,
I guess.
I
But it's
often
without, what's
go
interesting there is it's without making any criticism of the other parents' choices, isn't it? I think that's really the
Yeah.
key thing there is you can have your own choices and your own values in your own home, but you're not saying just because dad or whoever lets you do that, I'm criticizing him or them or
Yeah,
Uh,
I often used to say to my children as well, sometimes when you go to so and so, Joe again, I'll use him again as an example. You go to Joe's house and they are allowed screens at the table, or you go to someone else's house and they are allowed to do X, Y, and Z. But, you know, um, even within that house, Joe's mum and dad might argue about that. They might disagree about that.
yeah.
So in some ways, we're lucky. At least we don't have to argue about it on a daily basis because you know what you do here and you know what you do there.
100%. When I work with parents who are living together, raising their children, they often say, one will say, "What do we do if we have different opinions on how to approach something?" So it's
Mm.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
And
I don't. It's not just divorced parents that,
no,
that have
no.
this issue.
But it is a really good question as well, and also
Yeah,
the way, as you said, Fiona, really good point. We just stay on the moral high ground, right?
yeah,
And in your lane, do your thing, and don't say anything negative about the other parent. And in years' time, it, all that will come to will all you doing what you believe in is the right approach.
absolutely. I think very quickly here we ought to mention parallel parenting because we've been talking about co-parenting a lot. And co-parenting is held up as being, of course, best practice, but sometimes it's just impossible. And there are some people that you just can't co-parent with because maybe they counter-parent or everything, whatever you try, it doesn't work. So Heather, could you very briefly explain what parallel parenting is and when might it be a better option than co-parent than trying to keeping on trying to co-parent with somebody who just can't?
Yeah. So parallel parenting is another co-parenting style when it's when you're not able really to co-parent, and so you effectively raise your children kind of independently. And someone explained it is just kind of it's like two rails on a train track that are heading in the same direction, but they don't meet. They go along at the same time. So the same without crossing. And the real idea again is to minimize the tension for the children. You think about it from that point of view. So predictable for children, less stress is the objective when parents aren't really able to communicate and collaborate on many things. And I think that's the real kind of benefit of it in the sense that they're not involved in sort of day-to-day tension. And with two independent houses, all the things we just discussed, and really, I would say, and Fiona, like to get your view on this, but having as much set out in a really strong parenting plan at the beginning is really important because that's less areas of disagreement and conflict down the road if you've kind of set things up. And you probably also, Fiona, I imagine, would need to revisit it as because children change.
yeah, I mean, you would obviously want to future-proof it as much as you can,
Yeah,
but who can foresee every eventuality, right? I think we're fortunate in this day and age. We've got lots of tools to help with that as well. So we've got a lot of sorry, the parenting apps, co-parenting apps, things like Our Family Wizard and others of that genre, which are really helpful for parents, either initially because things are perhaps more tense in the beginning than they turn out to be later on, or for that parallel parenting journey that some parents are on.
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Um, we also want to talk a little bit about children and the family home. Um, and I think Fiona, when we were talking before, you mentioned that lots of you or some of your clients, particularly mums, often worry that the children won't want to leave the family home, that they won't be able to cope with moving, or that if the other parent were to keep the house, that the children would want to stay in the house, and so they would lose an element of their relationship with them, and so on. Um, just wondered how real that fear is, Heather. Are children as attached to the family home as parents sometimes think they are? What's your experience in terms of the work that you do?
I think that well, I have some from my own personal experience too. We worry because a house, often it means home, and we do.
Mm,
It's got such an emotional thing, isn't it? And I think also when you think about moving, the practical side of it is so tied up with this emotional kind of, you're taking your children's home away. So I think we just need to acknowledge how what a motive issue it is. But
mm,
from a children's point of view, I think the most important thing again is that relationship. And you are going to disappoint your children if you have to deliver the news that they're leaving their favorite family home. I did this with my family, and I remember my youngest daughter was absolutely devastated. And I understand. We lived in a lovely house, had a nice room, and where all that sort of thing. So that is understandable, and it's going to be hard. The
mm,
thing to think about is that again where you want to get to. So happily for me, I have since took a while. I found another house which I have made my home, and it's been lovely for me because it's been my home that I created for my kids. My kids are young adults, but I tried to make it a home for all of us, and I can safely say, if you ask my children, that they feel this is a special home and a place. So you get the end there in the end, but it can be quite a hard, transition and journey. But again, just thinking down the road, if you have to do it, staying in something which maybe is financially stretching you, maybe it's complicated, just to realize that it's about you and your relationship. And home isn't just a bricks and mortar, is it? It's the feel, it's the place, it's the relationships that you have with your kids, which really is the most important thing.
yeah. I think
Mm.
what you said just now is really so important around this is a loss, isn't it? There is it's not going to necessarily be the best news they've ever heard. There is a loss. There may be high emotions which need to be processed. Like you say, as our children move through life, we are going to have to deliver them bad news sometimes, and
Yeah.
they do have to deal with disappointment. Um, and so I often show my clients the kind of grief curve at that point. We go through a grief curve when we get divorced. Our children also go through a grief or a healing process when their parents get divorced. Um, and if we can stand alongside them, validate their feelings around it, understand their feelings around it, allow them to have those feelings around it,
Yeah.
then that's going to help them rather than trying to fix it by perhaps really financially struggling, like you say.
And
Mm.
also, that was beautifully said. Sorry, Finn. I was going to
That's
also
it.
say all those emotions you just said are what's so important. Like it might be that if it's I can understand you're going to feel sad, you're going to feel lost, you're probably going to be jealous of Emily who's still in her parents' house. All the big emotions. Just name name them all and get them out there. And now also when you look at pictures of the house later on, that probably will be sad too. So it's as much as we can embrace all the difficult emotions that we don't want our children to have. But again, we don't want to take them away or push them aside or say, "Oh, you'll get used to the new house. We'll find you some." You want to be able to really let them sit in them for a moment.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just going to ask Heather, what's the best and healthiest way to, I suppose maybe it's age dependent, but to give children enough information about the maybe the economic reasons for having a change of home?
Yeah.
Um, Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
I was going to say I can probably I'm doing this at the moment with my youngest who's 19, 20, and I'm going to be moving soon and we've talked about it a lot. Um, and one of the things that I've said, or, that I have talked him through is how much our home costs us right now. I've shown him the kind of the monthly outgoings that the home has because I live in a fairly big house. There's just me in it at the moment because he's away and his brother is has left home. Um, and so actually showing him that made actually a really big difference. He could see that over a period of 6 months we would be saving X thousand pounds, and he suddenly started thinking about what else we could do with that, which
Yeah.
was really quite helpful. But obviously, he's an older teenager, so I could do that. But yeah, I would say sharing age appropriately can be really helpful. The other thing that shifted it for him was I went away to see my parents who hadn't been very well and had to stay longer than I thought I was going to. So he was at home on his own for longer than we expected. When I came back, he said, "Oh, it's really lonely here on your own, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, it is." And he suddenly understood where I was coming from a little bit more, which was an interesting shift too.
Yeah, I think it's 100%. I think it's age appropriate, and it's that question: what do I need what do they need to know, and how can I present it to them in a way that we don't want them to worry and be fearful. So it's just it's kind of explaining the practical in a way that makes sense, kind of makes sense to them. And when you have really, often you could do it, you could, I was going to say draw pictures or play a game or something that just tries to bring it to life that
Mm.
there's change and that it's something that we're all going to work through together and
Yeah.
that kind of.
Yeah. And change is scary, but we can do it. We can do hard things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would agree with you too. My children were a little bit older when I get divorced, but so it's again you just use your judgment of what do they need to know, they don't need to know, because obviously the finances are can be difficult, and talking about them in a way that you don't want to kind of shield them from everything if it doesn't make if that's going to make it more difficult, but it's just something that's things that are appropriate as opposed to what they don't need to know.
Yeah. I think what would be a really good idea then for finishing off would be, so that we can end with some real hope for people watching and some sort of practical positive things. What would let's see, what would you say, Heather, is your biggest tip to help people navigate all of this positively and healthily?
It's hard to put that into one tip, isn't it? Can I have two? I think can
You
we
only
go?
allowed one.
Can we our first one?
You can have a couple.
I was going to say while I'm pausing because that's my big thing. I think that the I guess two things. It's one is the focus on the future, hard as it is, just so hard as it is, and just thinking about again that relationship that you would like to have with your children, because I'm very children focused down the road, I think is really the number one because it helps guide so many of the choices and decisions, the conversations you might be having with Fiona. I mean, everything really, it's like I call it the North Star, but it's just, it's so helpful. And the second thing is my circle the wagons, which is, I think, just bring in the people around you who can support you and your children. And I use the example of my children all have great godparents, and I went out and intentionally asked all the godparents to, not in a weird way, but to come just appropriately, just check in with their children, and so that with my children rather, and know that there's somebody else they could talk to who wasn't me or their dad, or just to make them feel that they're part of a greater whole that is with them. And also for me, if I'm the one going through the divorce, just choose people who can support you for the various different parts of the journey, really.
Thank you. Fiona, what would you say?
So I think to go back to where we started really with the nesting is to see all of these things as a continuum, as a journey towards that future that Heather was saying, and try if at all possible not to get too stuck or too bogged down in one particular place, one particular time, because you you do have to transition. A divorce or a separation is actually, if seen over the context of a whole lifetime, one very, very small part of your lifetime as an adult, and also your children's lifetimes. So there was a before, there's now a during, and there will be an after. So, don't get stuck, don't get bogged down. Like Heather says, have the people around you who can help you through, but see it as a continuum.
That's really helpful, I think. And from my side, I think um, look for the upsides. I spent a lot of my children's childhood looking for the upsides and things that I didn't really want to be happening. Even things like, I used to find it, a lot of my friends used to talk about their partner and they were very resentful that they did this and their partner didn't do as much as them. that kind of thing. And one of the biggest upsides for me of being a divorced parent, a single parent, was there was no one there to resent. There was no one there to get annoyed that they hadn't done whatever it was. And so I could use that when, when I had the thoughts about I'm the parent who does all the rugby club runs, for example. I could use that to get to sort of say to myself, oh yeah, but I don't have somebody to resent when they don't turn up on time to do it, or they're late at work and they can't do it, or whatever it might be. And I also then used to turn those things into a positive thing for myself. So my son used to go to rugby like half an hour's drive away. It wasn't worth driving him there, dropping, coming home, going back. So I used to take my book and I would go to the pub down the road, buy myself a Coke, and I'd have an hour of sitting with my book in peace. So find ways to make it work for you, would be my biggest tip. And I just wanted to tell a little story about your vision point as well. I remember when I was getting divorced the first time, one of the things that really kept me on the straight and narrow was thinking about my children when they had big life events. Graduation was one of them. Now my eldest son is graduating this July. Actually makes me quite emotional. And my ex-husband and myself will both be there. My son hasn't had to think about it. He hasn't had to have any kind of conversations with us about, can we manage to be together? Is it going to be okay? He didn't even give it a second thought. He just rang up and said, "Oh, graduation's on this date." Sent all the details to Dad as well. No problem. Whereas one of his friends is having all kinds of trouble with their parents' divorce. I think when she was about 5, and they haven't spoken since. And the whole thing has become really, really stressful for her as the child. She's receiving phone calls from both sets of parents asking about it, wanting extra tickets because they don't want to sit next to each other and all kinds of things. So keeping that vision in the front, like you said, Heather, I think is just one of the most powerful things that you can do through this process. And that seems like a very good place for us to wrap up. Very quickly before we go, Heather, could you let people know how they can find you?
Thank you. That absolutely. My website is the Parenting Partnership. You can Google that, Google me, and just get in touch. And I'm so happy to have a call with anyone, just to have half an hour to chat through how things are going and how I might help. So I would be
Brilliant,
delighted.
thank you. When
Yes.
when we put this onto YouTube and Spotify, I would ask for your details to be put on there as well, so that
Yeah.
people
Okay.
can see that when they look back.
Okay.
So I'm very aware we've run over by a couple of minutes, but I didn't think that we should cut any of that because it's all so important. So thank you both so much for today. Thank you, Heather, for all your wonderful expertise. And we will see everybody next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, Claire, so much. Okay.